money and put it into this ranch. And he, yeah, pretty much. But he never, he never really worried about money before, and he made other ways of making money. He went back and became, when he was a politician, oftentimes he would write books just for the money. Sorry, go touch my keyboard for a second. So he went ahead and came back east, and he went back into politics. His days as a Dakota cowboy were over. Okay, so when he came back to New York City, what did he do? He went ahead and worked for a while in the state legislature again, and then he went ahead and got his first real break as a New York City police commissioner. Okay, the commissioners are civilians which oversee the police department. And the New York City Police Department in the 1870s and 80s was one of the most corrupt places in the world. Okay, how did you get your job as a police officer? You knew someone. You owed money to someone, or someone owed money to you, and you got the job. There were police officers with felony records. There were murderers as policemen. There were people who couldn't even write their name as policemen. They got their jobs because they were politically connected. So supposedly, Theodore Roosevelt's going to be part of the group which is going to oversee the situation. And people actually saw Theodore Roosevelt on his first day of work, actually running up the stairs, taking two of them at a time. Right? Very much in character for him. And in some ways, what Theodore Roosevelt is a romantic, a person who comes from the heart on a lot of these things. So what did he do? He sat there from 8 to 5 and had meetings and learned this, that, or the other. And then he went ahead and said to a couple of his newspaper reporter friends, Lincoln Steffens and Jacob Reese, he said, come meet me at 5 o'clock tonight at my office in the New York City government building. And they did. And after work, instead of going home, what he did is he went out walking around to see what he could see for the New York City police. And he's going to see things which the New York people see all the time, right? For example, and he's got his two newspaper buddies right next to him. Like he'll go into a bar, and there you have a New York City police officer on duty getting rip-roaring drunk, right? And people see this all the time. Why can he afford to do something like this, which is so blatantly against the rules? Because the guy who owns the bar is able to own the bar because he pays off the local politicians. The local politicians can get the police officer his job, and then they can go ahead and drink on duty because it's part of a self-contained bubble of corruption. That kind of stuff happens all the time. He can't get in trouble because he's politically connected. Now, the people in New York, they see this all the time, and they lose respect for the police officers. So what does Theodore Roosevelt do with his barrel chest and his big, thick glasses? He walks up to one of the police officer and goes like this. Kind of hard, right? Mm-hmm. And he goes, and the police officer turns around, getting ready to take out a stick and knock him into the next county. And the guy's like, what the hell do you mean by that? Why shouldn't I knock you into the next county? And there's Theodore Roosevelt. He goes, because I am the New York City Police Commissioner, Theodore Roosevelt. And the guy's like, oh, sure you are. Now I'm really going to knock your head off. And then like one of the guys behind the bar is like, hey, I think that actually is the New York City Police Commissioner. And the guy's like, runs out the bar, right? And of course, Theodore Roosevelt looks at his journalist buddies, and they're writing the entire thing down. And then he walks out around 2 in the morning. He comes up to a police officer who's just completely asleep on a corner. And he's like, what is your badge number? And the guy's getting ready to again, you're disturbing my sleep. I'm going to knock you into the next county. I'm the New York City Police Commissioner. What is your badge number? And the guy looks around, whoosh, runs away, right? So he does this all night long and doesn't go to sleep at all. Doesn't go to sleep at all. He's walking around the streets, listening to the Italian and the Russian and the Yiddish and the Polish and the Slovakian and all the smells of New York in the 1870s. And then after being out there all night, he goes right back to his desk, works the entire day, and does it again the next night, not having slept for 2 days. That next day, of course, all the journalist accounts of what was happening are showing up in the newspaper, right? And the people are seeing this happening, and he gets enthusiasm behind his effort to clean up the police department, right? And you see this relationship very well with the press, right? Abraham Lincoln used newspapers pretty well to publish his opinions. He's going to do the same thing, right? Using the media effectively to go ahead and get his message out there, which will go ahead and generate energy for his political cause. He'll use that energy to pass his policies. Other things that Theodore Roosevelt does, as a New York City Police Commissioner, he establishes the first police academy because he sees that some of the cops can't even shoot the guns they have. They've had no training whatsoever. Let's have some more professionalism. They have writing tests. We have to actually take a beginning writing test, a reading test, to even apply to become a police officer, to get rid of those people who are illiterate. Have a brief background check to make sure these people haven't been convicted of murder someplace. He's trying to professionalize things, and you can see progress. You can fight corruption, you can fight bad government by bringing new policies to make government better, to progress, a belief that things can get better, that you don't have as much corruption as there can be. So after a while, as a New York City Police Commissioner, He goes ahead and runs for governor of New York and loses. Then he goes ahead and works for the United States Civil Commission, and then he goes ahead and gets promoted to be the Undersecretary of the Navy. Okay, and he serves there for a while until finally war breaks out in 1898. And Theodore Roosevelt was exactly one of those kind of people who was pushing for empire, a believer in American power, that American power on the world stage should finally go ahead and play an important role. It was his orders to Commodore Dewey, which said, take the Philippines if war is declared between the United States and Spain. So what does he do? He quits the Navy Department. He goes ahead and joins, he basically makes his own irregular militia outfit called the Rough Riders. He makes himself colonel in charge of that, and he basically has tryouts for all of his Dakota cowboy buddies. They all go down to San Antonio, Texas to try out to become one of the Rough Riders. I actually went to the bar in San Antonio when I was grading AP exams where he would meet with his buddies. And they go down to San Juan, Puerto Rico. San Juan Hill in Cuba. They storm the hill and they become war heroes. For example, Theodore Roosevelt actually shot a Spanish soldier and killed him on the way up the hill, and just thought it was great. Hunting animals, hunting human beings, it was really a manly, virtuous, kind of vigorous activity, really to show your mettle, to show your patriotism, right? I mean, I think for him, almost the very best thing you could ever do would be to die for your country, okay? Next best thing would be to kill other people for your country, right? So he becomes a war hero. Again, he earns the wrath of the army. The army can't stand him, the regular army, because he disobeys their instructions, because he gets all the media praise, right? He becomes a serious war hero at the end of this war. He comes back to New York, he runs for governor, and he wins. In large part because he's a war hero. He runs for the Republican Party, right? And he becomes governor of New York. And when he's governor of New York, he becomes so obnoxious to the Republican Party leadership that they want to get rid of him. They want to get rid of him, right? Because he doesn't take orders very well. He's not a party person so much as he's doing things that he thinks are right. He's not taking orders. So what do? They decide to go ahead and get rid of him. Where can we get rid of this loudmouth, loud guy here, Teddy Roosevelt, this war hero media guy, who just now is the governor of New York? Let's put him in the most worthless job in the entire country. Let's make him vice president of the United States. We'll never hear from the guy again. We'll kick him upstairs, right? So they do that. In 1896, the Republican Party leadership under Mark Hanna, right, they decide to go ahead and make Theodore Roosevelt the vice presidential candidate under William McKinley. And that works out pretty well. Theodore Roosevelt, he shadows William Jennings Bryan on trains everywhere, giving speeches day after day after day after day, tirelessly campaigning for his boss, William McKinley. And then McKinley wins in 1896 and becomes, in 1900, becomes the president of the United States. Okay? Now, again, keep in mind that the idea, though, is that Roosevelt didn't really get along too well with many of the important Republicans, even though he was in the same party with them. And that's important because in 1901, a deranged anarchist walks into the train station in Buffalo, New York, and shoots McKinley and kills him. There it is. And Theodore Roosevelt had been hiking up in Maine when he heard the news of the thing, right, that he'd been wounded. On the way back, Roosevelt hears that McKinley has died of his gunshot wound, and Theodore Roosevelt is president of the United States. And he's a young man. He's a young man. And Mark Hanna was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Johnson, read this point.
Roosevelt's big break came when McKinley was assassinated, to the consternation of most of the Republican Party. He was now president. Look what we got. The damn cowboy is president of the United States.
That damn cowboy is president of the United States. Okay, horrible. Not only that, but Mark Hanna was best friends with McKinley, and his good friend was assassinated. Now you have this iconoclast, this kind of rebellious guy is now president of the United States. He would go ahead and take money from wealthy people in the Republican Party, financiers, Rockefeller, people like that, but he wouldn't do their bidding. I was like, we bought him, and then he didn't do what we wanted. He's too independent. Okay? And what you're seeing here, as the way he probably would have said it, a new sheriff in town, right? There he is. We haven't had a strong president since Abraham Lincoln. Congress was running things, right? Theodore Roosevelt's going to change that. In some ways, he's the vision of the presidency for the 20th century. As he used to love to say this all the time, that's bully good. They started calling the presidency the bully pulpit because he would make speeches and he'd moralize, he'd tell people, he'd provide vigorous leadership. Something President Chester Arthur and Garfield did not do. Even Grover Cleveland, the best of these Gilded Age presidents, right? He wasn't really a person that was dynamic in his vision for the country. He was. He had young children, right? Theodore Roosevelt finally ended up marrying his childhood friend Edith from the same social class, and he had other kids with her. And so you had like a president that was young and vigorous and had actual children in the White House, where for a long time it was like old guys with big beards who took long naps and didn't do anything. Kids in the White House, it was a new vibe, right? And he's going to go ahead and provide this new vigorous leadership as to what he thinks should happen. Yeah?
So when he came back from from Dakota, so he like reclaimed Alice?
No, Alice was, yeah.
How old was she?
By then she's probably 8 or 9. And she was a wild lady. For example, when he was president later on, she got married, and he said basically this. He said, I can either control my daughter, Alice, or I can be president of the United States, but I can't do both. She was just a crazy lady, which I think probably comes from him. Anyway, he changes the presidency and the country. Roosevelt was a force to be reckoned with. Henry James called him the mere monstrous embodiment of unprecedented and resounding noise. Just loud, and he read a book every other day, period. I mean, he just did more things by 11 o'clock than most of us do all day long. And the reality was that he himself came from the upper class, so as a politician, he wasn't really that impressed with people who had money. For example, these robber barons, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan couldn't stand him, okay? And Roosevelt would sit there and probably say this, you think you are the wealthiest man in this country, and you probably are. You think you have more power than the president, and you're wrong. J.P. Morgan would say, oh, I have very expensive lawyers. And Roosevelt would say, I have some very powerful lawyers too. They're called Supreme Court justices, and I have 9 of them. If you go against the government with antisocial policies, I'll break you, and I'll break you bad. Roosevelt wasn't so much about like raising the poor or the downtrodden. Not necessarily that. What he wanted to humble the powerful. If you were a bully, whether you're like a drunken cowboy in a bar, or one of these political party bosses in New York City, or a corrupt cop, or a person who was a factory owner that wanted to beat up on your employees, he'd sit there and say this, you're going to beat up on those people? First of all, I want you to try beating up on me, and we'll see how that goes. He wanted to humble bullies. He wanted to bring down the powerful. He wanted to contest his own power against them. And what you're going to see here is an assertion of governmental power over the business community. For example, he would go ahead and meet wealthy business people and say, why is everyone so crazy about this Rockefeller guy? Why is he all that in a bag of chips? The guy doesn't know anything except oil and money. Oil and money. Why is that such a big deal? He's got all this money and he knows about oil. Okay, Roosevelt is a fine historian, a fine scientist, a cowboy, a soldier, a politician, okay? I mean, he knows things about 5 or 6 different areas. He can talk with journalists. He can talk with writers knowledgeably. And he meets these business people, and he's not that impressed with them. And frankly, if they're going to do things like have a monopoly position and abuse that monopoly position, he'll use the full power of his own presidency and the government to go ahead and break them in the name of the people. His policies become known as the new nationalism, the new governmental power for the people. Okay? We'll talk more about that tomorrow. You have any questions about the early life of Theodore Roosevelt, where he's coming from, his rise to the presidency? Yeah.
How can he break the business people?
We'll talk about that tomorrow.
Okay.
He can use Supreme Court. He can have people pass laws, and he can enforce the laws. And he can't be bought off.
Well, but the laws are made by Congress, which is controlled by...
The laws are made by Congress, but he is, as president, he's the leader of the Republican Party. He can get people angry by using the media. He can put huge pressure on Congress as a powerful president. They'll try and pass bills which he'll sign, and he'll use the government to go ahead and enforce them.
Gotcha.
What were his new policies called? National... You said his new policies were considered...
New nationalism. The new nationalism. Okay, everyone. Let's switch gears here a little bit. This is just beginning.